Among them was Winston Churchill, who wrote a book about it, and we still call one of the peaks Churchill's Picket, even though he was not very complimentary about our people. At the end of the pass is a green domed shrine where people throw coins to give thanks for their safe arrival. No one I knew had been to Islamabad. Before the troubles came, most people, like my mother, had never been outside Swat. We lived in Mingora, the biggest town in the valley and the only city. It used to be a small place, but many people had moved in from surrounding villages, making it dirty and crowded. It has hotels, colleges, a golf course, and a famous bazaar for buying our traditional embroidery, gemstones, and anything you can think of. The Maukhazar stream loops through it, milky brown from the plastic bags and rubbish thrown into it. It is not clear like the streams in the hilly areas or like the wide river Swat just outside town, where people fished for trout and which we visited on holidays. Our house was in Gulkada, which means place of flowers, but it used to be called Butkara, or the place of the Buddhist statues. Near our home was a field scattered with mysterious ruins, statues of lions on their haunches, broken columns, headless figures, and oddest of all, hundreds of stone umbrellas. Islam came to our valley in the 11th century when Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni invaded from Afghanistan and became our ruler. But in ancient times, Swat was a Buddhist kingdom. The Buddhists came here in the 2nd century, and their kings ruled the valley for more than 500 years. Chinese explorers wrote stories of how there were 1,400 Buddhist monasteries along the banks of the river Swat. The magical sound of temple bells would ring out across the valley. The temples are long gone, but almost anywhere you go in Swat, amid all the primroses and other wildflowers, you find their remains. We would picnic among the rock carvings of a smiling fat Buddha cross-legged on a lotus flower. There are many stories that Lord Buddha himself came here because it is a place of such peace, and some of his ashes are said to be buried in the valley in a giant stupa. Our Butkara ruins were a magical place to play hide and seek. Once, some foreign archaeologists arrived to do some work there and told us that in times gone by it was a place of pilgrimage, full of beautiful temples domed with gold, where Buddhist kings lay buried. My father wrote a poem, The Relics of Butkara, and summed up perfectly how temple and mosque could exist side by side. When the voice of truth rises from the minarets, the Buddha smiles and the broken chain of history reconnects. We lived in the shadow of the Hindu Kush mountains, where the men went to shoot ibex and golden cockerels. Our house was one story and proper concrete. On the left were steps up to a flat roof big enough for us children to play cricket on. It was our playground. At dusk, my father and his friends often gathered to sit and drink tea there. Sometimes I sat on the rooftop watching the smoke rise from the cooking fires all around and listening to the nightly racket of the crickets. Our valley is full of fruit trees on which grow the sweetest figs and pomegranates and peaches, and in our garden we had grapes, guavas, and persimmons. There was a plum tree in our front yard which gave the most delicious fruit. It was always a race between us and the birds to get to them. The birds loved that tree, even the woodpeckers. For as long as I can remember, my mother has talked to the birds. At the back of the house was a veranda where the women gathered. We knew what it was like to be hungry, so my mother always cooked extra and gave food to poor families. If there was any left, she fed it to the birds. In Pashto, we loved to sing tapi, 2-line poems, and as she scattered the rice, she would sing a verse. Don't kill doves in the garden. You kill one, and the others won't come. I liked to sit on the roof and watch the mountains and dream. The highest mountain of all was the pyramid-shaped Mount Elam, To us, it's a sacred mountain, and so high that it always wears a necklace of fleecy clouds. Even in summer, it's frosted with snow. At school, we learned that in 327 BC, even before the Buddhists came to Swat, Alexander the Great swept into the valley with thousands of elephants and soldiers on his way from Afghanistan to the Indus. Swatis fled up the mountain, believing they would be protected by their gods because it was so high up. But Alexander was a determined and patient leader. He built a wooden ramp from which his catapults and arrows would reach the top of the mountain. Then he climbed up so he could catch hold of the star of Jupiter as a symbol of his power. From the rooftop, I watched the mountains change with the seasons. In the autumn, chilled winds would come from the mountain. In the winter, everything was white snow, long icicles hanging from the roof like daggers, which we loved to snap off. We raced around building snowmen and snow bears and trying to catch snowflakes. Spring was when Swat was at its greenest. Eucalyptus blossom blew into the house, coating everything white, and the wind carried the pungent smell of the rice fields. I was born in summer, which was perhaps why it was my favorite time of the year, even though in Mingora summer was hot and dry, and the streams stank where people dumped garbage. When I was born, we were very poor. My father and a friend had founded their first school, and we lived in a shabby shack of 2 rooms opposite the school. I slept with my mother and father in one room, and the other room was for guests. We had no bathroom or kitchen, and my mother cooked on a wood fire on the ground and washed our clothes at a tap in the school. Our home was always full of people visiting from the village. Hospitality is an important part of Pashtun culture. 2 years after I was born, my brother Khushal arrived. Like me, he was born at home, as we still could not afford the hospital, and he was named Khushal, like my father's school, after the Pashtun hero Khushal Khan Khattak, a warrior and poet. My mother had been waiting for a son and could not hide her joy when he was born. To me, he seemed very thin and small, like a reed that could snap in the wind. But he was the apple of her eye, her ladla. It seemed to me that his every wish was her command. He wanted tea all the time, our traditional tea with milk and sugar and cardamom. But even my mother tired of this and eventually made some so bitter that he lost the taste for it. She wanted to buy a new cradle for him. When I was born, my father couldn't afford one, so they used an old wooden one of the neighbors that was already 3rd or 4th hand. My father refused. Malala swung in that cradle, he said. So can he. Then nearly 5 years later, another boy was born. Atul, bright-eyed and inquisitive, like a squirrel. After that, said my father, we were complete. 3 children is a small family by Swati standards, where most people have 7 or 8. I played mostly with Hushal because he was just 2 years younger than me, but we fought all the time. He would go crying to my mother and I would go to my father. What's wrong, Johnny? He would ask. Like him, I was born double-jointed and could bend my fingers right back on themselves, and my ankles click when I walk, which made the adults squirm. My mother is very beautiful, and my father adored her, as if she were a fragile china vase, never laying a hand on her, unlike many of our men. Her name, Tor Pekhai, means raven tresses, even though her hair is chestnut brown. My grandfather, Yansir Khan, had been listening to Radio Afghanistan just before she was born and heard the name. I wished to have the white lily skin, fine features, and green eyes, but instead had inherited the sallow complexion, white nose, and brown eyes of my father. In our culture, we all have nicknames. Aside from Pisho, which my mother had called me since I was a baby, some of my cousins called me Lachi, which is Pashto for cardamom. Black-skinned people are often called white and short people tall. We have a funny sense of humor. My father was known in the family as Kaista Dada, which means beautiful. When I was around 4 years old, I asked my father, Abba, what color are you? He replied, I don't know, a bit white, a bit black. It's like when one mixes milk with tea, I said. He laughed a lot, but as a boy he had been so self-conscious about being dark-skinned that he went to the fields to get buffalo milk to spread on his face, thinking it would make him lighter. It was only when he met my mother that he became comfortable in his own skin. Being loved by such a beautiful girl gave him confidence.